Buenas tardes a todos. Aquí estamos de vuelta con nuestro profesor visitante Mauro Tosco de la Universidad de Turín. Mauro es un profesor de lingüísticas africanas y hoy nos va a hablar de borderless languages in a world of borders, examples from Africa and beyond. And we're very happy to have him here again for an online talk. And if you have any questions at any point in Facebook or on Zoom, you're welcome to write them down and we'll be moderating questions after Mauro's talk. So thanks and welcome again, Mauro.
Thank you. Thank you. Gracias ancora, Emily and everybody. Should we wait maybe a couple of minutes more if somebody arrives, somebody else or not?
I would just say go for it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I will, as usual, I will share my screen and we will discuss it. Hi, everybody. I will discuss it and of course, as always, you can interrupt me anytime if you want to ask question or if something is not clear, or if you want to discuss a few things, because what we're going to do today is partially about Africa. As usual, Africa will come in a bit later. And it's not only about languages, but a little bit also about political philosophy and how it reflects upon languages. Some of what I'm going to say are well-established facts. Some other things are maybe more my personal ideas, which I presented in a few publications now. And I guess that I am screen sharing now, right? I am?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Okay, so this is the title. And, well, there are quite a lot of different things. More or less, these are the topics of what we are going to discuss today. Even if I personally am not a scientist of politics, I will have to discuss a little bit what we mean by state and nation state. But what I say here is not controversial, is a historical phenomenon, the state, I mean, apparently born in there is some mistakes here, apparently born in Western Europe in the late Middle Ages. It was theorized much later, essentially not from Machiavelli in Florence, but much later by Jean Bodin in 1576 in an important book called Les 6 livres, again, another mistake, sorry, in French, Les 6 livres de la République. The state as a political organization triumphed in Europe with the Peace of Westphalia, 1648. Of course, the state has been much later exported as a political organism, a political kind of organization, much later to Africa and nowadays all over the world. There are not parts of the globe which do not belong to a state. There are a few neutral areas, and of course there is Antarctica, which does not belong officially to any state, although is controlled by a few states. Quintessential to the state is the concept of sovereignty, which is a modern concept. It's not innate. It's a modern concept, again, for the modern state, from let's say from Jean Bodin, that is from the 16th century, that is a final and exclusive authority which is political and juridical. We live, everybody, we live and we will die in a world of nation states. Nation state is not the same as states, but we will discuss it maybe later. Therefore, in a world of borders, there are borders because quintessential to the state is sovereignty. Sovereignty is authority. Authority is, sorry. Authority is upon a fixed area, and we need borders. There is a long discussion among philosophers and historians of state and politics if the states, so-called, that is the political entities of the past, think about, I don't know, the Roman Empire, had the borders. There are words for kind of border in Latin, for example, limes, but limes apparently is not juridically the same as what we mean by border. The authority of the Roman emperor or whatever was not limited by a fixed border on a map. Our problem, because I am a linguist, our problem is how do languages cope with borders? What are the problems with language and borders? In a way, what is the space of languages? We are going to say that to see that there are many borderless languages, types of languages that cannot be assigned a border, and they are in general the most fragile and the most susceptible to change and to be eliminated. Is there a future for borderless languages? What do we mean with borderless languages, languages without borders? I like, again, I repeat, I'm not a philosopher, not an historian, but I like to read with you quite a long quote from Gellner, Nations and Nationalism. I'm sure that everybody knows this book. It's quite classical by now, Ernest Gellner. The book has been translated in many languages, also in Spanish. And look at this picture. Of course, this is not by Gellner. The picture is by Kokoschka, I think. Consider two ethnographic maps. Gellner does not speak about languages, speaks about ethnic groups, nations. So what do we mean by nation? He has a very famous definition of what a nation is. And ethnic groups, and so on and so forth. Consider two ethnographic maps, one drawn up before the rise, of nationalism, and the other after the principle of nationalism had done much of its work. And he goes on with this long quote. The first map resembles a painting by Kokoschka. Kokoschka is the beginning of the 20th century. The riot of diverse points of color is such that no clear pattern can be discerned in any detail, blah, blah, blah. Interesting what he says in the next sentence, a great diversity and plurality and complexity characterizes all distinct parts of the whole. The minute social groups, which are, the atoms of which the picture is composed, complex and ambiguous multiple relations to many cultures, some through speech, that's interesting, some through religion, some through a variant faith or set of practice, administrative loyalty, and so forth. When it comes to painting the political system, the complexity is not less great than in the sphere of culture. Obedience for one purpose and in one context is not necessarily the same as obedience for some other end or in some other season. Let me go back to show you again the painting by Kokoschka, which is a painting of Venice, as you may see. And Gellner goes on like that. Of course, you recognize this painting. This is by Modigliani. With Modigliani, we are well in the 20th century, 1920 or 1930. Look instead, says Gellner, at an, sorry, oh, come on. Look instead at the ethnographic and political map of an area of the modern world. It resembles not Kokoschka, but say Modigliani. There is very little shading. This is interesting. Neat, flat surfaces are clearly separated from each other, as you see here in this painting by Modigliani. It's generally plain, it's clear, it's easy to discern where one begins and another ends, and there is little if any ambiguity or overlap. Shifting from the map to the reality map, we see that an overwhelming political authority, part of political authority, has been concentrated in the hands of one kind of institution that is, in general for us, a reasonably large and well-centralized state. That is, Gellner says that we moved, if we want to speak with the metaphor of painting, from Kokoschka to Modigliani. We have clear, well-cut lines. We know where one color begins, the other ends, one feature begins, the other ends. And that's what we see in a map of the political entities of today. We know where Mexico ends and the United States of America begin, and so on and so on. Very little shading. I think that this is the most interesting phrase. I want to, okay, this. So for Gellner, it's a word of bidimensionality. Kokoschka's Venice is still a riot of diverse points of color. It's a juxtaposition. There are different colors, they are mixed, but it's two-dimensional. In our world, in the world of languages, as I'm going to say today, languages are not only bidimensional, two dimensions, but they are at least three dimensions. They have at least three dimensions. We don't want a juxtaposition of colors. We want a superimposition of colors. I don't know, I'm not Gellner, and I think that somehow we want to keep with this metaphor of paintings. We can look at Jackson Pollock. We are in 1950. Jackson Pollock invented the technique of dripping, that is, of letting painting drip on the canvas, and to have different layers of colors. That is, in a way, the painting becomes three-dimensional. Okay, at last, let's speaking about languages. I think that many, maybe most languages defy bidimensionality. This was especially the case in the pre-nation state era, that is, in the past. But it's still present, it's still found nowadays, and it's still found in Africa and also in other parts of the world. There are adimensional, that is, non-dimensional languages spoken in the same bidimensional area alongside other languages in a situation of plurilingualism. There are low varieties in the glossia. We're going to talk a little bit about the glossia if you want some notes on these technical terms of linguistics. It's basically the use of two or more varieties within the same community according to different parameters, social parameters. But there are also pidgins and creoles that are in contact with a superstrate, as we say in linguistics, in what we call a creole continuum. There are many other things that we're going to say, especially with reference to Africa in a moment. There are languages that have no fixed position in the space, that is in the canvas, that move in the canvas. So we cannot make a painting of them, a picture of them. Maybe we should make a film of them. There are specific, these are linked to specific ecological and economic conditions. They border without a change in this ecology. And for example, there are the languages of pastoral, nomadic, and peripatetic peoples. We all know what pastoral people are. So we have, and we are going to see a few examples from Africa. We have nomadic people. We have peripatetic peoples. This is the case, for example, in Europe, but also in a few parts of America, of gypsies and the gypsy communities that sometimes, not always, have a specific language. And how do we paint, how do we draw a map of these languages? This is also a technical problem when we linguists want to draw language maps, as we are going to see in a moment. Obviously, when we deal with states, modern states, nation states, even democratic nation states, and these kind of languages, these languages are obvious targets of language policies by what Gellner's, as we read, called reasonably large and well-centralized states. Remember that the aim of the state is a Modigliani-style maps, that is simpler and clear-cut linguistic, because this goes with political maps. They do not want kokoschka, and of course they do not want, and they don't know how to deal, and we don't know how to deal with Pollock and with pluridimensional languages. Both adimensional and borderless languages are less visible target than classical ethno-linguistic minorities, because in the case of the typical classical minorities, we can draw them on a map. And we can say, these are the minorities of Mexico, for example, or of many other countries. Of course, this is just a language map of the world. Language map because it's more or less a map of different language families. And of course, it's a bidimensional map. It has 2 dimensions. Let's take an example from Somalia. We're going to discuss Somalia in my last, the 4th lecture, presentation in more detail, but we are going to see in a couple of weeks that we are dealing here with mainly, let's say, almost a monolingual country. There is a great uniformity of culture, language, ethnic group, and so on and so forth. This is a language map taken from our, let's say, our and the ethnologist's Bible in a way, that is ethnologue. The ethnologue map of Somalia is very easy to draw. There is just one color. There is just one color because there is basically one language. Okay, there are a few minorities in the south, and you see a different color, a green color here. And then, but I'm not interested in these different colors because they are drawn on the map. We are interested in what cannot be drawn on the map. You see that in this part of the country and the Somali-speaking area, he writes different names, but with the same color. These names are Mai, Gar, and a few others. We're going to discuss them in more details the next time. They don't know how to draw them because they are in a way different dialects of the same language. But are they really different dialects or not? In this case, borderless is negated. Why do I say borderless? Because these groups, this is another map. This is a map not drawn by linguists. It's mainly about ethnic clans and groups, but also, and they draw different colors, but this map is clearly wrong. It's clearly wrong because it's not true that here in this, whatever is this color, this kind of violet, we have the last, these Digil dialects, and here we have a different type of dialect. This is simply not true. Let's look at a more, a closer to reality map, and it's this one. This map is a strictly linguistic and dialect map of Somalia. Maybe the only one we have is from 1986, a map of the of Somali dialects in the Somali Democratic Republic, you see that he decided to draw these dialects, or whatever they are, with these circles. And these circles go upon the yellow surface, because the secret here is simply that the yellow language is a language spoken by sedentary people, people who live in mainly agricultural people, so they are sedentary, they live there all year long, while these groups move seasonally in the area of the yellow ones, of the sedentary. They move according to certain traditions, certain pastures upon which they have a traditional rights, and so and according, of course, to the availability of fresh water. So this is an example of people, nomadic people who, being nomadic, superimpose themselves, they mix themselves, but not always. They mix themselves in different times. That is, we have to bring here the dimension of time, in different parts, in different times, in different seasons, in different periods of the year. It's not a very satisfactory map. It's a way to describe the situation. But just for a moment, think about what sociologists, anthropologists, and most of all politicians want to do. Imagine that we want to make a language policy for the right to use the native language or dialect for this nomadic group. How can we cope with this problem? Is there a way to cope with this problem? Are there solutions or not? I say that in this case, borderlessness is tamed. There is a solution, a provisional solution, but it's not a practical solution, of course. There are other types of languages. This, of course, is not Africa. For just one map, we go out of Africa. This is Northern Europe. This is let's say, from the Netherlands to German, Poland, Belarus, and Ukraine, and even up to northern Italy, passing through Switzerland, Austria, Hungary, blah, blah, blah. Of course, there is no single language in all this part of the world. What the map is trying to describe, to draw, is a fiction in a way. That is, they try to draw what was the area where Yiddish, that is the language traditionally and sometimes even nowadays spoken by Jewish communities in Northern Europe, were spoken. And so there were Jewish communities from Belgium and the Netherlands to the west, of course, all the way to the east, at least to Kyiv, Ukraine, and much more to the east. They spoke different dialects of this Yiddish, which means Jewish, of course, in German language. Of course, there was no an area in which Yiddish was spoken. Yiddish was spoken in several points, maybe hundreds of points, but in all these cases, there were points in the map. So it was a point language. In a publication, I draw using always this Gellner's metaphor of paintings. I use the metaphor of the pointillisme, that is a painting style of the end of the 19th century, in which you fill the painting with many tiny points of different colors, and the result comes when you look from a certain distance at the result. So there was no Yiddish area. The important point here is Yiddish. There were many different Jewish communities. They spoke this language. As linguists, we can say that it was one language with dialect varieties, that is, everybody more or less understood everybody else from east to west and vice versa. But again, we do not have a community, single community, most of all a single area. Let's go back to Africa. This again is another map of Somalia, but I don't want to show you Somalia now. I want to show you two small points. One is in Ethiopia, Eastern Ethiopia. You cannot see it from here, it's too small, but there is a small name here. It's written bigger style by me here. Harari. Harari is the name of the language spoken in Harar. Harar is just one town that you can cross in a couple hours walking, even less. The language is spoken just in town, just by the population that is native to the town. It's a town or a city language. Another example in the same part of Africa is from South Somalia, is the language of Brava or Barawa. The language is called Chimwini or Brava or Bravan or Bravani. They have different, very different histories. In the case, I mean, recent histories. In the case of Harar, both are, by the way, towns of very ancient Islamic tradition, very important for the history of Islam and the history of manuscript traditions in the east of Africa. One of them, Harar, is an almost independent regional state within Ethiopia. In the town itself, the language is the official language, is written, is taught, blah, blah, blah. And apparently is still well preserved. In the case of Somalia, the language was not recognized. Then there was the civil war starting in 1991. The population of the town almost completely fled away originally first to Kenya, to Mombasa, where most of them are. And after that, many of them went to United Kingdom and to the US, in particular Seattle. So nowadays, the language is almost, well, it's not forgotten, but it's spoken more in Liverpool than in Somalia itself. This is a case in which a city language was submerged by politics, in this case, by a violent political confrontation. Then there are other examples. This is a map of South Sudan. You know that South Sudan is probably, yes, it is, the last nation state that was admitted to the United Nations in 2011, when it gained recognition by, by the United Nations, by the Security Council. After 2011, the South Sudan itself became, again, fell into a civil war that is going on. So it's a typical example of a state that it is a failed state, as politicians say, failed state that actually was almost never born. But that's not what really interests us in this moment. There is a huge ethnic and linguistic diversity, maybe something like 70 different languages and ethnic groups. There is no common language. And especially there is no common language. There is one official language, that is English, that is not spoken by anybody, believe me, anybody in South Sudan. You cannot go around and do your daily work speaking English in South Sudan. The second language in a way is Arabic, but Arabic was the language of the enemy of the Sudan, the Arabophone Sudan, so it's not really well loved in the country, especially by politicians. So neither Sudan Arabic nor English are widely spoken at all. But there is one language that is widely spoken. The point is that it does not exist, it's not shown in the map, is not shown in the language policy, because it's difficult actually to show it. Also in this map, which is an ethno-linguistic map, this part of South Sudan doesn't have a specific color. The capital of Sudan is Juba, and there is a language that we call, it doesn't have a name, we call it Juba Arabic in English, and the publication, or Arabic Juba in the local language. This language is a pidgin or a creole, we are not exactly sure what it is, derived from Arabic. Now have a look at what the Article 6 of the Constitution of South Sudan, the provisional constitution, but that's what we have, says all indigenous languages of South Sudan are national languages and shall be respected, developed, and promoted, and blah, blah, blah. This is the typical blah, blah you find in constitutions. In my opinion, constitutions are a work of fiction. English shall be the official working language in the Republic of South Sudan, as well as the language of instruction at all levels of education. That's the end of it. There is not a list of languages. There is not a list of languages. Sorry. And this is a part of the page of Ethnologue that is a list of languages that lists all the languages of Sudan. And at a certain point, the Ethnologue lists also what they call Arabic Sudanese Creole. And they say widespread, I don't read everything of it, you can access it online. And they say, look at what I circled. All groups in South Sudan have some L2 speakers. It's used for wider communication. It's used as language 1, first language, or language 2 in Juba and other towns in Equatoria. I didn't say that Equatoria is the southern part of the country and is the main part of the country and is the part where Juba, the capital, is located. As a Creole and lingua franca, this language varies enormously in form from place to place, from speaker to speaker, blah, 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 depending on subject and interlocutor. And is changing rapidly. And that's it. So on the one hand, is the most widely spoken language in the country. But on the other hand, is not even mentioned in the constitution or in any kind of official document of the Republic of South Sudan. By the way, the Republic of South Sudan controls only half of the country because there is the civil war, as I mentioned, but whatever. A few years ago, with a colleague, Stefano Manfredi, in Paris, we did fieldwork, sociolinguistic fieldwork in South Sudan. It was a period in which there was no civil war. We checked the degree of multilingualism in two different neighborhoods of the capital, very different neighborhoods. One is an historical one, the other one is a very modern one, but whatever. The informants claim to speak, for example, only one informant, that is 0.8% in Gudele, claimed to be monolingual, 6.8% in Malikia, that is the other neighborhood, claimed to be monolingual. By the way, if they are monolingual in this unrecognized Juba Arabic, that is the unrecognized pidgin or Creole. Many are bilingual, 21% and 45%, that is in general more than 1/3 of the population of the town. Many, even more, claim at least to know 3 languages, 42%, 4 languages, 15%, and even more than 4 languages. That is a situation of widespread multilingualism. But if we look at which language do they actually speak, Juba Arabic is really the first. Here we have different tables in our publication. I just took here one table, table 3, which is the first language, and is the first language, by far the most widely used first language, spoken in Gudele by 1/3 of the population, and by 1/4 of the population, and by more than half, 60% of the population. By the way, Arabic, that is not the pidgin, but real Arabic, Sudanese Arabic, is the second spoken language. Then we have different so-called tribal, officially called tribal or ethnic or indigenous languages. There is a whole list of them. English, by the way, does not even appear in the list. Nobody has English even as a second or third or fourth language. And only a few say that they do not know Job Arabic. So here we really know that there would be a common language for the country, or at least for this part of the country, but there are political, ideological, and also practical, technical problems in recognizing this language, which is not written, blah, blah, blah. This is a typical problem that we have with languages that do not have borders, that cannot be depicted on a map, drawn on a map. How do politicians in Africa and beyond deal with these things? I know a little bit about Ethiopia. This is my main field area. And I worked a little bit, again, I'm not a politician or a scholar of politics, but I analyzed the constitution of Ethiopia, and I'm now analyzing for a forthcoming publication the constitutions of Africa for what concerns languages. The constitution of Ethiopia is quite recent, because Ethiopia came out of a civil war in 92, as far as I remember. So this constitution was written down, I think, with American, US assistance in terms of rights, these kind of things, and United Nations assistance in 94, and it was officially adopted in 96. So it has 25 years. The interesting point is that there is no, it's one of the few countries in the world, and in Africa in particular, that has no official language. It's a little bit like the United States. As you know, the United States have no official language, which is understandable, because the Constitution of the United States is much older, is from the, as you know, from the 18th century. But most modern or contemporary constitutions have at least one official language. There is no official language in Ethiopia, because they realized that there are so many different ethnic groups that it was not possible to say that one or two or three were official languages without engendering a new civil war. And different from other African countries, there is no colonial language. So they simply say in Article 5, called languages, 1, all Ethiopian languages shall enjoy equal state recognition. This is more or less the same as what the South African Constitution said, and what, believe me, most constitutions say nowadays. It doesn't mean anything. In 2, they say Amharic, that is the most important and traditionally the official language of the country, Amharic, shall be, look how they call it, the working language of the federal government. That is not the official language, but the working language, the language we use in parliament and so forth and so forth. But we are very, very cautious, and they do not want to call it official language, because to call something an official language is quite dangerous. 3, members of the federation may, by law, determine their respective working languages. That is, this is an example of what I call a bottom-up language policy. The language policy is not done by the central, in this case, federal government, but by the single entities that they are called nationalities in Ethiopia. and there are also other names, nationalities and nations of the country. That is, each nationality by law has the right to write its language, develop its language, as we are going to see in the next slide, that is Article 39. Article 39 has been much discussed, not by linguists, but by experts in politics and constitutions, because of comma 1. Comma 1 is a very bold statement. Every nation, nationality, and people in Ethiopia has an unconditional right to self-determination, including the right to secession. There are very few countries in the world that say this, because it's very bold, because in theory, at least, it means that everybody could leave the country and create a new country. Always remember that this is a work of fiction. It's constitution. It doesn't mean that they do it because the next day they find the army in front of the home, but this is another thing. The constitution says other countries that that allow the secession are South Africa. It was like that, imagine, under Stalin in the Soviet Union, just to stress that constitutions are work of fiction. And there is the nice example of Liechtenstein, which is almost a city-state in the Alps, in Central Europe, in north of Italy, that allows each of the towns of this mini-state to secede, to leave the country. So comma 1 is a very bold attempt, but doesn't speak about language. Comma 2 speaks about languages. Every nation, nationality, and people in Ethiopia has the right to speak, to write, and to develop its own language, to express, to develop and promote its culture, to preserve its history, and go so on and so forth. So this is what I call the bottom-up approach to language policy. Do what you want, in principle. So choose your alphabet. Somebody choose the Amharic script, the majority choose the Latin script, choose your language, fight among yourselves if you want. We do not care. What is, I want to read section 5 of Article 39 because, personally, I do not know what a nation or a community or an ethnic community here is. The anthropologists here among you, for example, Emily, can tell me what an ethnic group is. But here we have something very strange, that is a constitution, a juridical document that purports to define what an ethnic group is. I don't know of other examples. In section 5, they say a nation, nationality, or people, for the purpose of this constitution, is a group of people who have or share a large measure of a common culture or similar customs. That is, here the focus is on culture, is on cultural anthropology in a way. Mutual intelligibility of language. Here the focus is upon what is language and how language is different from other languages. Belief in a common or related identities. Identity, as you know, is a very dangerous and difficult to define word. I personally don't know what identity means. A common psychological makeup. This phrase always gives me trouble because I don't know exactly what it means, a common psychological makeup. So in the discussion, please help me. We always discuss it with students. Makeup, the first meaning of makeup to me is quite different, but this is another thing. But today, let's focus on the last phrase. And who, the subject, remember, is a group of people who inhabit an identifiable. And this is very important, and I underlined it, predominantly contiguous territory. Yes, they need a predominantly contiguous territory because they have to define borders for the ethnic groups, because nowadays the borders in Ethiopia, as in Nigeria, for example, are based upon ethnic federalism. That is, every group has a territory. In that territory, which is fixed by law and in a map, they have the right to implement their policy. But now imagine a nomadic group. They do not inhabit a predominantly contiguous territory. From time to time, according to different patterns and reasons, and for different reasons, they go around the territory and they mix with different peoples who do have predominantly contiguous territory. So my question is, how should we ever make a language policy for nomadic people? I don't have an answer to that. I'm quite happy not to have to deal with this problem, because I would know how to make a language policy for my language group that is not the Italian majority language group, but I believe I belong to a minority, but it's a bordered minority that is more or less, it has borders, but a nomadic people does not have borders.
Mauro?
I think that we do not have much time left, and I think that we can leave all this material. This was about diglossia and was about Europe, in particular Italy, but again, I will skip all this. And these are my final questions. There are questions. Is it possible to preserve language and cultural diversity? I do not know. Many say yes, but as a linguist, I know of many examples of failed language policies. Failed means that the language is spoken less and less, and it has less and less speakers. Remember that for us linguists, we are not interested in identity or ethnic groups. In principle, we are interested in languages. And for us, the vitality of a language simply means how much the language is transmitted to the next generation. So even if I don't know, the Catalans, or even if here the Nahuatl or many other peoples keep saying that they are Catalans, Basques, whatever, or Nahuatl or whatever, but they do not transmit the language to the next generation, parents do not transmit it or transmit it less and less to the future generations, the language is doomed, the language is lost. This is a failed language policy. There are many examples of failed language policy. The most famous one is that of Ireland, but there are not, as far as I know, very examples of successful language policies. Is it compatible with modern nation state and democracy? I had a few slides after that, but we will have to skip them. If yes, how do we deal with the dimensionality of language and language communities? How do we deal with languages that do not have a clear-cut fixed position in space? For example, the language of nomads, and the case of diglossia, that is the languages of communities, sometimes the same community that speaks different languages in different domains, one at home and one in offices or in official communication. This is a big problem because most languages are spoken in these conditions. I could stop here. I had a few very controversial slides, but it's not my fault if they are controversial. They are from two of the most important, famous authors on language policy and the revitalization of language minorities. They were Joshua Fishman, maybe the father of the sociology of language, spoken dead a few years ago. By the way, he was a native speaker of Yiddish from Brooklyn, United States, and Jean Laponce, who was a French-born Canadian political scientist. We cannot read what they write about the problems of democratic nation states, the states in which we live in, because we do not live in South Sudan, thanks to God. We cannot go into these slides. By the way, they are quite long quotes, one of them in French. But believe me, they say that democracy has more than one problem when it deals with language minorities, because there are technical problems well, for example, in making different laws for different groups of people, by the way, and separating different groups of people. But I will close now with hardly any conclusion at all. I am okay with mapping. I like maps. I like geography. Geography was what I wanted to do when I was a young boy. And then I ended up doing linguistics. I don't know why. I have problems with bordering, but by the way, I don't know how to draw maps without making borders, because whatever I do looks like Modigliani, doesn't look like Pollock. And now you know what I mean. And yes, and we badly need solutions, probably not solutions that can be offered by linguists or by linguists alone. And this is the end of my talk today, and I thank you very much. And I stop sharing now. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mauro. Does anyone have questions either from Zoom or from Facebook? ¿Algunas preguntas para Mauro?
Preguntas en español también no es problema. Yo comprendo el español y mi respuesta será en inglés. And yes, one of my favorite topics as a non-anthropologist is what an ethnic community is. And I don't have an answer to. I read many things about it, but I still don't have an answer to this. Maybe I know what a language community is, but even this is difficult.
Ok, no hay preguntas en Facebook. De nuestros colegas para acá.
Of course, there are other types of borderless languages that were not discussed. There are artificial languages, Esperanto and the likes, and they have communities. And it's very difficult if we ever want to preserve these languages. I don't know if we want to preserve these. There are speakers officially, for example, in India, there is quite an important minority that claim to speak Sanskrit, that is a sacred, holy language, and if they speak it, they have the right to have it as an official language and to have it taught and written down. By the way, Sanskrit is mentioned, maybe not everybody knows. Sanskrit is mentioned, imagine, in the Constitution of South Africa. because among the Indian and Hindi, in this case, community of South Africa, there is quite an interesting, important community, and some of them say that they speak Sanskrit, and even if they don't speak, they claim Sanskrit as their language. This was another example. Sorry to interrupt. Of course, you could say that I am talking about very strange and peculiar and marginal phenomena, but believe me, they are not marginal, because, because South Sudan is an area where a pidgin or a Creole is spoken. Here in the Caribbean, there are many pidgins and Creoles, and they are not, or they are half recognized and not. For example, Jamaica has as its official language English and not the Jamaican Creole, even if, believe me, and those of you who are native English speakers know it very well, that is not at all understandable by a common English speaker. Haiti with French, and a few other examples in the smaller little islands. And and many other cases in Africa too, by the way. Think about the big towns of Africa, think about Lagos or Abidjan, where kind of hybrid languages are more or less spoken. Sometimes by native speakers, because the kids grow up not in English and not in the ethnic languages, they grow up speaking Nigerian pidgin English.
Mauro, you talked a lot about South Sudan. I'm curious how these new language policies of South Sudan have affected Sudan to the north in terms of, a newly created border. How is English? I don't believe that English is also the official language in Sudan, is it?
But to give you the short answer, I would say, I don't know. The longer or longish answer is that the constitution of Sudan, either all of it or now only North Sudan, changed so many times. So for a long time, actually, both English and Arabic were both officials. Then they say that Arabic only was official in the north, and English only was official in the south, which was former English protectorate, I think. Then they said Arabic only, and the harsh fight against the South began, also for different reasons, of course. Now, the last version of the Constitution of Sudan, by the way, not from the revolution of a couple of years ago, no, it was last year, I think, but from a few years earlier, officially, the Constitution of Sudan does not say anymore, does not mention anymore any official language. So officially, again, I speak officially in fiction, Arabic is not the official language of the country. The Constitution does not provide a list of the language groups, but almost no constitution provides a full list of language groups. They say that they recognize every language, every ethnogroup, and blah, blah, blah. And the reality, I don't know. The reality is that sometimes, as far as I know, but I'm not an expert on Sudan, the reality is that there is quite a latitude, a little bit of freedom for grassroots education in the local languages, by city councils, by intellectuals, sometimes also by missionaries, because even North Sudan is not at all Arabic and all Muslim, and there are important Christian communities. I don't want to be apologetic of Sudan, but I remember a period in which we were planning a field work in Sudan, and then we shifted, as I mentioned, to South Sudan for different reasons. And the guy responsible for granting visas and, let's say, research permits, not visa, research permits at the University of Khartoum was, imagine, I was shocked by this, was an American woman, black, by the way, and a missionary. That is, everything is quite strange and complicated in this world. At the same time, if these grassroots movements grow too much and they go or border on politics, yeah, they are repressed even violently, very violently. In general, they prefer the ethnic languages to be written down in Arabic script, and they made a few attempts in this direction. And about South Sudan, simply there is no more language policy because there is no state. When we were there, but now is a few years ago, the American groups from the Summer Institute of Linguistics, that is again evangelical missionaries, were not making the language policy, but were in charge or charged by the Ministry of Education to develop primers in different languages of the country. But again, they couldn't do it for the Pidgin Arabic, because Pidgin Arabic does not exist. So the Ministry of Education officially, so Ministry of Education did not want. They well knew that Pidgin Arabic is the language of this, at least of town, but they couldn't develop the language itself. And by the language, by the way, the language is developed a little bit by grassroots movements. They are now a few publications. It's very well active in Facebook, this kind of things, yeah, but it doesn't have an official recognition. That's it.
Really interesting. Other questions? Más preguntas?
In charge, this woman, American woman, in charge, she's no longer there, but I was shocked, I forgot to say, I was shocked, an American, because remember it was the period in which Sudan was in the blacklisted countries of the United States. After it was not Reagan, it was much later, maybe not even Bush president, maybe it was Obama, but in any case, it was in the official list of terrorist states, but still there were American missionaries, so it was quite strange. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for your very interesting talk. Your next presentation will be December 5th, I believe.
Yes, Monday, December 5th. Yeah. Not at 5 p.m., but at 12 p.m. That is at noon.
Okay, at 12 p.m. on the topic of an overview of Somalia and Somali language. So we'll look forward.
Instead of presenting a short grammar of Somali, that is the language, African language that I speak more, or let's say less bad, I decided to present the history of the Somali language, the history of writing in the Somali language, and the laws about the Somali language, and that is a little bit about the Somali culture.
Great. Well, we look
Thank
forward
you,
to
Emily.
that.
Thank you, everybody, and sorry again for talking always too much.
No, you're just fine. Thank you again, and we'll see you all soon.
Say thank you. Bye bye. Bye. Thank you.